Here are the top mistakes that could cost your ag business millions. Under-insuring your assets. If you're involved in the agricultural world, you understand assets are a large part of the ag industry. If you're involved in production agriculture, if you are a farmer or a rancher, you understand you have your land as an asset, you have your equipment, you have barns, you have grain storage, you have tractors, you have your implements, your disc, your cultivators, your combines. Farmers and ranchers have lots of assets, and it's easy to sometimes overlook or even undervalue your assets. The solution to this is to make sure that your agent is coming to your operation, or at least giving you a phone call periodically throughout the year just to check in on you and do a review of your assets. If you are a farmer or rancher, I do recommend to keep an Excel spreadsheet with all of your equipment. This is going to list your tractors, your cultivators, your barns, your grain storage, just to make sure that on your policy, you have everything listed that you could want to list for your operation. The worst thing would be if you have a barn on your property where you keep hay or you're keeping your commodities, or if you have grain storage on your property, and if you even have a commodity in that grain bin that during certain times of the year is going to fluctuate. If you get done with corn harvest and your grain bins are full, you need different coverage that day than you did 6 months ago when you had everything at the elevator. And so it's very important to make sure you're updating your assets and keeping your agent informed of what's going on. If you do work with a good farm and ranch insurance agent who understands your lifestyle, understands your business, they'll be calling you at least once a year to check on you and making sure that your assets are protected, because your assets are what keeps the farm going. And that's what allows you to produce food for our wonderful country. Failing to update coverage with business growth. The same operation you had 10 years ago is not the same operation you have today. More than likely, you picked up some more lease ground, or you've purchased some more ground, or you purchased more equipment, or you may have even sold equipment. But the same policy you had 10 years ago may look a lot different than it does today. If you started as even a first-generation farmer like myself, you may have started with 2 or 3 acres of land and a little 40 horsepower tractor and a disc and a cultivator and a 2-row planter. If you're growing your operation and you're investing in equipment, investing in more lease land, it's very important. That same policy you had as a hobby farmer, if you're buying up more land, leasing more land, upping your equipment, if your exposure is increasing with your sales, if you're getting into retail sales, if your business has changed, it's very important to update your insurance policy as you change those business practices, because the risk profiles are going to be different. If you're doing different things on your operation, your insurance must be adjusted if you want to protect those assets. Inadequate liability coverage for your employees. If you're like me, you understand crazy things happen on the farm, crazy things happen on the ranch. If you have employees that are helping you with irrigation, or helping you with planting, or helping you with harvest, I can think of many crazy stories on the farm, people getting hurt, riding side by sides, going too fast sometimes. If you do have employees on your operation, it is very important to have liability coverage for that. In certain states, such as Texas, workers' compensation is optional for a right-to-work state. But if you are farming in Texas and you have employees on the operation, you do understand the risk for injury is high, especially if you have warehouse workers. If you're involved in the food distribution business and you have people working in the warehouse, operating forklifts, moving boxes from place to place, you understand there is a lot of risk involved with your employees getting injured on the job. There are ways to manage those risks in the warehouses and on the farming operations. But if one of your employees gets hurt working for you, working on your farm, working in your food distribution business, if something does happen and they get hurt, they're coming for the farmer or the rancher. And our job is to make sure that we are focused on producing food for our country, imports and exports. And we don't want to be worrying about if an employee gets hurt, worrying about getting sued or going to court. If it's in a peak time of harvest, we need to get grain out of the ground, we need to get crops out of the ground and get stuff out to the market. The last thing you want to be doing is worrying about going to court because an employee got hurt and they're suing you for their injuries. That's the last thing that we need. And so it's very important to make sure that you review this on your insurance planning, your workers' compensation insurance. If they do get hurt, this covers their medical expenses. And if they have an injury that is an ongoing injury, the great thing about workers' compensation insurance is that it's going to pay that employee until their injury is taken care of or their illness is taken care of. And God forbid there be even a death on the operation. If one of your employees is working around the grain bin and they fall into a full grain bin and they suffocate, for example. I've seen stories before of employees going into grain bins to check on things. If an employee were to fall into a grain bin and get sucked in, it's like quicksand. It's very dangerous. And God forbid that happens and someone loses their life. Workers' compensation can help you on your farming operation to make sure that if you do go to court, you have insurance backing you and taking care of those expenses if they were to come. Overlooking cyber insurance. Y'all, it's 2024. It seems like everything now is digital. It seems like everything now is on the computer or on the internet. If you're watching this now, you're either on your telephone or on the computer. So it is a digital world these days. It is a digital world these days. And so if you're doing any kind of transactions with money, it is important to at least review your options for cyber insurance. If you're a farmer or a rancher, or if you're involved with wholesale or retail of food or food distribution, you probably don't think a whole lot about cyber because we're not doing a whole lot of online sales. But I'm seeing a lot of people in the ag industry that are doing online sales. I've seen websites such as Barn to Door that are allowing people to get their produce through a straightforward network. And it is very important to at least look at your options for cyber insurance, because if you are doing any kind of transactions with money, review your options for cyber insurance. The solution with cyber insurance is if someone were to hack your systems or hack your computer or get into your phone and take client data, such as their card information or their name or their birthday, and if you even have socials in your systems for processing, if they get access to those things, you do want to have some kind of protection for cyber. Like I said, everything these days seems to be on our computers and our telephones. And be sure if you're doing, especially retail sales, if you're doing retail sales for beef, for example, and you're taking in card payment information from your clients, it is important that you have cyber insurance. If someone hacks your systems and gets a client's card information, you do want to be backed if you do get involved with a lawsuit. So I know it's not something we probably think about very often as farmers and ranchers. Is cyber insurance. Why do I need cyber insurance? I'm growing food. If you're doing any transactions of money, you'll make sure you have cyber insurance. If they hack your bank accounts or your systems or anything like that, you'll make sure you have some kind of backing for that. Relying solely on basic home insurance. This is a big one because I've seen so many times people will have even small hobby farms. They'll have a policy with ABC Insurance, for example, and I review the policy and I'm like, okay, wait, so you got 50 acres, you have 2 tractors, you've got a side-by-side, you've got a cultivator. Where's this on the policy? And they're like, oh yeah, I thought it's all lumped in there. I thought it's all lumped into my house policy. No, these things need to be itemized. If you have barns on your property, if you have tractors, if you have equipment, if you have side-by-sides, you cannot rely on a basic home insurance policy if you want to protect your ag exposures, especially if you have livestock, for example. If you have a basic homeowners insurance policy, you have livestock on the property. What if your livestock gets out at night and someone hits a steer on the road? who are they going to call? They're going to call the person who owns the livestock, and the person who got injured or got their car damaged is going to come after that person. And so there are rules, there are laws if they're on an FM road or if they're on a county road. But if you have livestock and you have a basic homeowner's policy, I think it's very important to review this with your agent and just be transparent and say, hey, is this covered? Do I have any kind of farm coverage on this policy? Because if not, you're leaving yourself exposed. And like I said, guys, we are 1% of the population who's drawing food for our nation here in America. And so the last thing you need is to be kicked out of business because you have these lawsuits because someone got hit by a cow and they passed away and they lost a loved one. They're coming after the farmers. We're the 1% who are producing food. We've got to stay in business. We've got to keep doing what we do best. And so I just want to educate you on these things. I think it's very important to review your policy because insurance can be a safety net for your operation. Insufficient pollution coverage. Of course, if you're involved in agriculture, you do know that even if you're an organic farmer, we're spraying some kind of fertilizer, herbicide, insecticide on the crops. Even if it is organic, we do understand there are organic ways to put out, there are organic methods to take care of our operations. For example, let's say I have a client that is spraying glyphosate, for example, and you're killing out last year's crop to drilling your new cover crop. And let's say the glyphosate drifts over to your neighbor's field and kills their fancy shrubs. They're going to start thinking, how did these shrubs die? I know that one farmer was spraying something the other day with a drone. It was drifting over, but I didn't think anything of it. And then they go to the farmer and they say, hey, my shrubs are dead now. What were you spraying? If you mention you're spraying Roundup, for example, they're coming after the farmer. And even if they don't win the lawsuit, you still have defense costs if you have to go to court. And so very important to review the pollution coverage on your farm policy, also known as chemical drift. Most farm insurance policies have this built into a policy, but make sure you review the limits for it because there are different limits that you can use for your chemical drift liability coverage. And so if you're doing any kind of spraying, whether it's fertilizer, last week, I'm growing turnip greens this year. I'm doing turnip greens for wholesale. We're looking at selling turnip greens to local schools through the TDA. And so last week we were spraying 15-0-10 on our turnip greens. We use a drone. We use the DJI Agris T40 drone. As we were spraying these crops, I do understand we have neighbors on the operation. And yes, the wind was blowing and there may be some minor chemical drift, but thankfully we were just spraying fertilizer. And so fertilizer is not going to hurt the neighbor's crops. But what if they have a pond nearby and the fish were to die, for example? You have to think of these things. There is exposure. If you're spraying any kind of chemical, be aware of, for one, make sure it's not super windy. But of course, number two, make sure you have chemical drift coverage on your policy, because if not, then you are left exposed if your neighbor finds out that you're spraying some kind of chemical that hurt their fish or hurt their crop or hurt their crops or hurt their shrubs in their garden. So be sure to review your policy with chemical drift coverage. Not doing a periodic review of your insurance policy can cost you millions as an ag producer. And here's why. Every year, things are changing on farming operations. You pick up new lease ground, you buy new ground, you buy new equipment, you might get new grain storage, you might build a new barn, you might build a new house for your employees if you have H-2A workers. There's always things changing on farming operations. And so it's very important to review your policy with your insurance agent because things get lost in the weeds sometimes. If we're not reviewing our policy together and sitting down and reviewing these things, we don't know if you purchased a new tractor. We're going to check in with you, but it's only once a year. And so it's very important to just keep top of mind. If you purchase new equipment, if you build something new midterm before your policy renews, call your agent. And if they're doing a good job for you, they're checking in with you throughout the year to make sure that you're doing okay. So just keep it top of mind. Make sure you're doing a periodic review with your insurance agent because things change all the time on farming operations. And if you're involved in the food distribution world, you understand things are always changing. Warehouse may change, locations may change, employees may change. And so it's very important to make sure you're covered on all your bases if you're involved in the agricultural world. Even if you're a livestock producer, if you're doing if you got a cow calf operation, make sure if you do carry any kind of animal mortality, make sure that you have the right coverage listed on a blanket policy for your livestock. If you're grazing them on wheat, you're going to ship them out pretty soon to the feedlot. Make sure that you lower that policy if you sold your crop for that year. So there's times where there's peak coverage. There's times where you have more grain in the bin than you do in other times of the year. And so it's super important to make sure that you're doing a periodic review of your farm insurance policy. Just make sure you're up to date on all your bases. Something we don't think about much in the agricultural world is employees turning around and suing the farmer or the rancher. But y'all, it's 2024 and people are more sue happy than ever. And our job as producers, I'm a vegetable producer here in Texas. Our job as producers is to produce food. That's the bottom line. Of course, my job also is to educate people about how to protect our farms, our ranches, and our agricultural businesses that support farms and ranches. The last thing on your mind is, man, what if they sue me due to thinking I'm doing discrimination towards them? I feel like these days people get offended for anything: age, sex, location, where you're from, your last name. People get offended by anything. If you have employees, they're on the farm. Now, honestly, most of us in the ag world, we're pretty hard people and we don't get offended by little stuff like that. But y'all, it's 2024. And if you're finding labor on your farm from other places, other sources, you don't know what you're getting sometimes. And if you're to terminate an employee and they turn around and they say, Joe Bob fired me because I'm 70 years old and I'm on my way out of here, which may not even be the truth at all. But what if an employee says that and then they decide to sue you? There is a way to protect yourself with insurance. It's called EPLI insurance. EPLI is Employment Practices Liability Insurance. And that means that if you were to terminate someone and they think that you're terminating them due to any kind of discrimination, the color of their skin or the age or whatever else, like I said, it's 2024. Us involved in the ag world, like I said, we don't get offended by these things very often, but you never know what you're getting whenever you're hiring people. And so if this does happen and they were to sue you, that could cost your ag business millions of dollars if there is a big lawsuit over that. So be sure to consult with your insurance agent, ask these questions. If they're not advising on these things, ask the questions. And if they're involved in farming and ranching, they'll understand the reason behind this. If you never heard of it before, Employment Practices Liability Insurance, consult with your agent. Ask them what this is. And if they have any kind of ag background, they'll understand sometimes the employee database, and they'll understand that employees change a lot in the agricultural world. So you never know what you're getting sometimes. If you get an employee that's looking out to get someone, to get a farmer or a rancher, and they were to leave and they say, they fired me because my age, or they fired me because of my sex or whatever, I wasn't strong enough or whatever. If they were to say that and they were to try to sue, you do want to have some kind of protection for this. And here's the thing, y'all. These policies are very inexpensive, but they can protect your farm and your ranch or your food distribution business. And so be sure to ask these questions, consult with your agent. And if we can do anything to help you guys out, we're always here. We love agriculture. We love the ag community, and we are here to serve.